The declaration of war lay on my table on my own paper, and above it hung a calm blue box offering me a file. My name is Rickard. 4 years ago I died at a desk in another world, a burned-out lawyer with a gacha habit and nobody in the room, and a goddess who audits such things sent me here with one gift. Any contract I sign cannot fail. I had spent the gift on a starving village, and the village had become a city, and the city had broken an army, and now the king who sent that army had declared war on 60,000 people to erase one woman, my wife. I looked at the blue box a long moment. "Open the file," I said. The box unfolded like a book of light. Final quest, the contract king. Objective, end the war. Method, unspecified. And beneath the shining letters in Seraph's own hand, so to speak, a smaller line I have thought about every day since. Note, the ledger does not require a battle. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed, alone in the hall at midnight at the sheer size of what the system was daring me to try, and my laughter must have carried, because Verena appeared in the doorway with a candle, read the glowing box she couldn't see, read my face instead, and said, "You've had an idea. God help Vera." The War Council expected a war. My father talked fortification. Wick talked levies. Even Aldous' quiet letters asked after musters. And I stood up at the long table with the declaration in my hand and told my council the truth as I saw it. Malric had 8,000 fewer soldiers than last year and a treasury of rumors. Armies were the one currency he could still mint, terror the one tax he could still raise. Meet him with armies and we fight his only strength, so we would not. "Gentlemen," I said, and I confess I enjoyed the silence, "we are not going to beat Vera on a field. We are going to foreclose on it." I wish a portrait existed of the council's faces when I said it. My father looked at me the way he looks at my sword stances. Wick asked, flatly, whether I proposed to invoice 8,000 soldiers. Hertz got there first because merchants always do, and began to laugh hugely, helplessly, pounding the table with a fat fist while the soldiers stared. "He means it," he wheezed. "God's teeth, gentlemen, he means it. He's going to buy the war." And Kali, who had been silent, folded her needlework, looked around the table and administered the coup de grace. "Better," she said. "He's going to sell it, to them." Aldous' next letter, when the plan reached him through quiet channels, contained a single line on the subject. "I have alerted my treasury to observe and take notes." The Bank of Asheville opened in the first month of the war, in a concrete hall that had been a granary annex, which Camel considered thematically perfect. Its notes were plain, printed, watermarked, and backed not by promises, but by things this frontier famously had: grain in sealed granaries, soap in crates, amber in barrels, every note redeemable on demand at posted rates, the reserves published weekly in the ledger for anyone to count. The frontier laughed at paper money for exactly 1 season. Then winter merchants discovered a note folds where silver spills, travels where silver robs, and buys the same sack twice as fast. And by spring the compacts markets ran on Asheville paper, and the laughing had moved somewhere quieter. Camel was named the bank's first governor. She wept once in private over the founding ledger, and then ruled it like a small, correct empire. Her father-in-law framed the first note. Number 1. I signed it, of course I signed it. Opening day deserves its record. The bank's first customer through the door was Marin, by arrangement with absolutely no one, who marched to the counter, deposited 1 silver piece with tremendous ceremony, counted her printed note twice, held it up to the light for the watermark, nodded once, and informed the queue behind her, "It's good." That nod was worth more than my reserves. The first skeptic was Grum, who arrived declaring that no smith in history had ever been paid in promises, was walked through the redemption vault by Hob, our ancient strong-room guard, now master of reserves and insufferably proud, stood a long time in front of the actual grain and the actual silver, and emerged an evangelist of the most dangerous kind, a converted one. He now lectures his apprentices on fiduciary soundness at the forge. They bear it. I tried, for the record and for tradition, one exploit. If a contract cannot fail, I reason, and a banknote is a promise to pay, Then a signed note is an unbreakable contract with whoever holds it, and I could underwrite the entire currency with the blessing itself. I brought the scheme to Seraphi with the old shameless hope. Technically, she began, and I swear the pause was theatrical, that is what you have been doing since the village, my lord. Every posted wage, every well board, every rate kept because keeping it was who you decided to be. The box glowed gently. The blessing binds your promises. It has never once needed help with the paper. I sat with that longer than I let her see. My whole empire, and the cheat was never the ink. The cheat was meaning it. The notes crossed the border by themselves. We never smuggled a single one. Commerce did it, the way water finds cracks. Varan border towns, paid in Malric's coin that lost weight every debasement, began quietly pricing in Asheville paper, because ours bought the same loaf on both banks of the river all year. His provincial governors banned the notes, then fined them, then, in two documented cases that made Kali cackle over the ledger proofs, demanded their own fines be paid in them. A currency is a daily election. Malric's subjects voted every market morning with their pockets for the enemy, and every note that crossed carried its little printed clause mark of a promise kept, which was, of course, the actual weapon. We were not exporting money. We were exporting the evidence that a government can keep its word. I saw the border vote myself once unannounced. I rode to the river market at the seated ford with Dane and no banners, hood up like a certain thief I married, and stood at a stall while a Varan fishwife made change. She took her customer's Malric coin with a face like wet weather, bit it, muttered, and weighed it. Then the next customer offered an Asheville note, and she smoothed it flat, held it to the sun out of pure habit, and put it in the dry pocket, the inside one, with her wedding ring. Dane leaned down to me as we walked on. "That's the war one, then," he said. He was 4 years early and entirely correct. Later that season, a provincial governor fined a river town for trading in enemy paper, and the town paid the fine in it, and the governor's own clerk receipted the notes into the dry pocket of the province's strongbox, because winter was coming and everyone can read a watermark. The ledger crossed with the notes. A Varan language edition, plain prices and plain law in one dry joke, wrapped around soap crates and folded into amber shipments, copied by hand in border taverns until our print run was the least of its circulation. Malric answered with counterfeits, a false ledger full of atrocity tales from Asheville, and it might have worked except that his forgers, ordered to match the real sheet, bought genuine paper stock through the same 9 cutouts as always. Watermarked. Our watermark on his lies, verifiable by any tavern keeper with a candle. Kali ran the exposure across a full front page under the driest headline of her career, a note on paper quality. I am told it was read aloud in Varan market squares to actual applause. You cannot buy that, although, technically, he did. The counterfeit exposure became a border festival in miniature. Tavern keepers took to keeping a candle on the bar specifically for checking sheets, and the checking became a ritual, and the ritual became a toast, hold it to the light, and I am told that phrase now means prove it in 3 river dialects. Kali received, through channels, a furious Varan diplomatic note about information warfare, had it checked against the light on general principle, found it genuine, framed it beside her press, and answered with a year's free subscription. She was 60 that winter. I have never seen anyone younger. Then Camel went hunting and the war found its true shape. Vera's great vassals, the dukes and margraves and counts who owed Malric their armies on demand, owed other people money, because lords always do and terrified kings make terrible credit. Their paper was held by exchange houses from the coast to the capital, discounted, resold, despaired of. My wife bought it. Quietly, through intermediaries, at prices despair sets, until the Bank of Asheville held the debts of half of Vera's war potential in a fireproof room under the old granary annex. We never called a single one. That was the artistry. We simply wrote to each lord privately, enclosing a statement of his obligations, their new domicile, and the bank's standing offer. Generous terms, honest rates, renegotiated like gentlemen, whenever his lordship should find himself. And here the letters permitted themselves one clause of poetry, at liberty to bank with the future rather than arm the past. The musters began to fail that summer. Not dramatically. Nothing in this war was ever dramatic, which was the design. A count pleads harvest and sends half his levy, late. A margrave discovers his boarder needs him at home. Two dukes arrive at the royal camp with such small retinues that the camp's own clerks, paid in arrears, write mocking songs about it, and the songs travel because we print them. And when Malric's paymasters finally moved to hire mercenaries with fresh-struck coin, the mercenary captains, men of the world with excellent information, asked to be paid in Asheville notes. I want history to record that I did not plan that detail. I read it in a dispatch and had to put the dispatch down and walk around the room. Fate has a sense of humor. It is drier than Collie's. The debt letters went out over one winter month, each one hand-carried, each one sealed with the bank's plain seal, which was beginning to open doors the crown seal couldn't. The replies taught me the whole map of Vera's exhaustion. Some lords answered with lawyers, and my heart sang, because lawyers meant negotiation and negotiation meant the end was arithmetic. One duke answered with a hunting invitation, which Collie translated as surrender with dignity requested. And one old margrave, whose family had held its border for 9 generations, answered in his own shaking hand with a single question that told me we had already won and what winning would cost. Will your bank's terms allow me to pay my men what they are owed before it pays me what I am worth? I wrote the clause myself and made it standard. Soldiers first. It cost the bank a fortune in the short run. It bought us every army it touched. What fighting there was, the border ate. Malric ordered raids that autumn, Terror's last argument, and the Compact's Beacon Webb and Sam's mixed companies met everyone inside the hour, and the pattern of the Lion-Earth days repeated at scale. Fords that failed, storms that arrived, supply trains that took wrong roads in fog. Veteran Varan soldiers began refusing border postings as cursed, and they were right, though the curse was mostly drill and arithmetic wearing Luck's coat. The one raid that reached a village found it empty, evacuated on 11 minutes warning, cellars sealed, wells covered, and a printed notice nailed to the well arm in Varan informing visitors of the posted rates for honest work 60 miles east. The raid captain kept the notice. We know because he crossed with it in the spring, and it hangs in the bank now, framed, next to note number 1. Sam's war, meanwhile, was fought at 3 in the morning, and he fought it beautifully. I rode one intercept with his mixed companies, frontier boys and Varan defectors in one column, moving on a beacon signal through country they'd drilled blind, and watched them fold around a raid at a sleeping hamlet like a hand closing. No horns, no glory, spears and lanterns and posted procedure. The raiders, surrounded before their torches were lit, were marched to the gate tables, fed and read the leaflet, and 4 of the 11 signed on the spot, which Sam finds philosophically outrageous and personally convenient, since he drills recruits harder than any raider ever suffered. His companies call themselves the innkeepers because, as their commander explains to every ambassador who asks, nobody attacks Asheville twice. The first time we take you prisoner. The second time your staff. Malric did what frightened power does when the outside stops obeying. He turned inward. The purges that winter were terrible, and I will not make them small by making them vivid. The ledger printed the refugee accounts plainly and let plainness do its work. Every noble he arrested convinced 3 more that the debts in our fireproof room were their retirement plan. Every officer he shot for defeatism taught the rest that defeat, at least, was survivable elsewhere. His terror, which had held a stolen kingdom together for 7 years, had begun consuming its own structure, and the sound of it, even from across a border, was the sound I knew from old case files. A regime doing our work for us, one confession at a time. I felt no triumph reading those dispatches. I have freed too many people from the far side of that machinery to cheer while it runs. The purge refugees reached our gate all winter, and the old machine took them in, scaled again, never changed. Lords' families in servants' cloaks, officers with their insignia in their boots, and one night an entire cathedral school, 40 children and 3 teachers who had walked the mountain paths, and the city turned out with blankets at 2 in the morning like it was drilled, because it was. Iska's tables ran double shifts. The gray-haired cooper, master of his own guild now, stood translation duty in his fine clothes. And I watched a purged Varen colonel, a man who had probably burned villages under orders I'd read about, stand at the brazier while the clause about leaving whenever you wish owing nothing was read to him twice at his own request, and then sign, and then put his face in his hands. Mercy is not soft. It is the hardest arithmetic there is, but it compounds like nothing else in either world. The exiles came to Verona all year, and she received them, and it changed her. Varen lords' widows purged officers, a bishop with his cathedral's rolls sewn into his coat, all of them drawn to the last daughter of the rightful line, and all of them, sooner or later in our hall, bending toward her with the same question under their courtesies. When, Highness? When do you take it back? I watched her carry that question through the winter, and I said nothing, because some contracts a person can only draft alone. It was at the long table at supper with the whole family loud around her that she found her answer and simply said it into a lull without ceremony. "I am not going to be Vera's queen," she said. "I am going to be its proof. There's a difference and I've decided to enjoy it." Laurie refilled her cup without a word. Camel made, I noticed, a small tidy note in the household ledger, filed, resolved, family. She told me her whole reasoning only once on the wall walk, the night after she said it at the table. Her father's seat restored would make her the one thing she had spent 6 years refusing to be, which was a symbol that other people died for. A council under law, witnessed by the heir who declined, would make Vera the one thing it had never been, which was nobody's possession. "You taught me the trick, you know," she said, watching her old country's dark horizon. "The strongest signature is the one you don't force. You left a line blank for Camel once. I'm leaving a throne blank for a country. I married 3 people who are smarter than me. I recommend it without reservation." Aldous made his move at midwinter, and it was the move of the man I'd come to love like a second, better-resourced father. A royal proclamation, read in every market of Corving. The Crown recognized the Margravete's conduct of the Eastern War, guaranteed its compact, and in the clause that mattered, declared that the Crown would receive as lawful any settlement of the Varen succession endorsed by the lawful heir of the murdered Duke. Resident, the proclamation noted with a straight face, in the city of Asheville. He had, with one paragraph, made Verena's signature worth more than Malric's army. I wrote to thank him. He wrote back 4 words in his own hand, no seal. "Finish it cleanly, Margrave." My 23rd birthday fell in the middle of the endgame, and the city, which now held 100,000 souls and no longer fit in any number of squares, celebrated it as a public holiday I had not authorized and could not stop. Ding. Age 23. And that same night the other chime, the one I'd been waiting for without admitting it. Tier 6. Population 100,000. Final gate. The catalog opened one last time, and it was 1 page, and the page was empty except for a single line of gentle light. "Nothing left to sell, M.Y. Lord. It was always going to be you." I sat in the dark with that for a long time. Somewhere below my window, 100,000 people were laughing at a festival I hadn't planned in a city that had been a graveyard with a well when I woke up in it. The shop was right. It usually was. It had just never been the shop. The birthday festival that year invented itself a tradition I hope outlives every wall. At dusk, the districts launched paper lanterns from the squares, thousands of them, each one made from a page of old ledger stock, each one carrying, written in whatever hand its family owned, one promise kept that year. The sky over the city filled with drifting golden paper, 5 years of the habit she gave me rising, and I stood on the manor steps with my family and watched 100,000 receipts float over the walls, and Seraphi's box glowed beside me all evening, saying nothing, which for her is a standing ovation. The end, when it came as paper. Of course it did. Through the winter, Vera's dukes and counts had been meeting, first in twos, then in fives in hunting lodges and bank branches, and what they drafted there came east to me in fragments for review, because I had spent 2 years becoming, without ever setting foot in their country, the only lawyer Vera trusted. The instrument they wanted was one I had been drafting in my head since a red box in a frost-bright lane. An abdication. Full, formal, irrevocable. The throne surrendered not to a conqueror and not even to the heir, but to a regency council of the realm's own peers, pending a succession settled by law. Reparations schedules, amnesty boundaries drawn narrow and honest. The slave trade abolished in a single unambiguous clause I wrote 7 times to make unbreakable. And at the bottom 3 signature lines: the council's, the witness heirs, and his. They tell me the last muster was the shortest in Varen history. Malric called his banners for a spring campaign, and what answered was a delegation. 11 of his greatest vassals rode into his capital, unarmed, in council regalia, with a printed document and a bank's escort, and behind them, commanding the honor guard that made the whole thing possible, an iron-gray man in a plain coat whom half the army recognized and the whole army obeyed. Voss. The general who had resigned rather than dig a king's graves had spent his retirement being visited by every officer Malric still had, and when the council needed a marshal whose word outranked terror, he came out of his cottage, put on no uniform at all, and walked at the front. I told you to remember him. Men like that come back into stories at exactly one moment, and they choose it themselves. The journey west was a procession neither of us planned. Word ran ahead of the drafter and the heir, and at every Varen waypost the crowds grew, quiet crowds, watching crowds, people who had spent 7 years learning not to gather, standing along the road to see the proof ride past, upright in daylight, her name announced by heralds who had orders and, increasingly, enthusiasm. At the border itself, at the salt ford where I once carried her up a bank, an honor guard waited on the far side in plain coats, and at its head older, straight as a pikestaff, Voss. He greeted Verena with the full court bow of the old regime, the one no one had dared perform in 7 years. Then he looked at me, and at the document case chained to my saddle, and the iron face allowed itself one dry crack. "You brought the good ink, Margrave." I showed him the jar. It was labeled fish sauce. Laurie's idea. He laughed for the first time in our acquaintance. One short bark, and the border crossing after that felt like weather clearing. The signing took place in Vera's throne room, under the stolen crown's own vaults, and I was there, because the council's letter had contained a sentence I will keep forever. The realm requests the attendance of the drafter, that the instrument be executed correctly. Me. Attending on Vera's request, at Vera's expense, under Voss's guarantee, to supervise paperwork. Verena rode beside me the whole way in violet and steel, and crossed her father's border upright in daylight with her name announced at every waypost, and I watched 6 years of ditches burn off her mile by mile. And in that vaulted room before the peers of the realm, I finally met Malric, a gaunt, handsome, exhausted man of 50, hollowed out by 7 years of listening for footsteps, his terror worn down at last to something almost like relief. He looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at Verena, the proof of everything alive, unerasable, married into a bank. "You have your mother's eyes," he said, which was the cruelest thing he could have said, and the only kind thing he had left. And then the king of Vera picked up the pen and unmade himself in 3 strokes, and the chime that rang in my skull was so vast and so soft that I understood, finally, that the ledger had been waiting for this page since before I was born the second time. No one cheered in the throne room. It wasn't that kind of room anymore. The council signed in silence, 11 hands. Then Verena stepped to the table for the witness line, and the room knelt, the whole vaulted chamber of peers, to the daughter of the man Malric murdered, and she stood very straight in the middle of their homage and signed her whole name. And then, in the silence, she did the thing I will tell our grandchildren about. She declined. Aloud, formally, in the old court grammar, she renounced the restored seat in favor of the council and the law, and gave her reason in one sentence that the ledger ran under the only banner headline of its history. I have seen what a country becomes when it is one person's possession, and I am already home. Malric went to a monastery in the northern hills that afternoon, under guard, alive, irrelevant, which was her sentence too, and crueler than any gallows. To grow old, unimportant in a quiet room, while the world got on. The abolition clause executed at dawn the next day, and I attended that too, because I had written it 7 times and I owed it my eyes. The slave markets of the border provinces were closed by council writ. The stockyards opened, and the first column of freed people came out into the morning under escort, thin, blinking, carrying each other, and were met, because some machinery travels faster than armies, by gate tables. Asheville tables, shipped west with the reparations administration, staffed by Iska's readers, some of whom had walked out of stockades themselves 5 years before. The pages were read aloud in Varen, every clause twice where asked. Work if you choose it, wages posted. Leave whenever you wish, owing nothing. I stood at the edge of it with Verena and watched her country begin to sign its way back into the ledger of kept things, name by name, and neither of us managed dignity, and neither of us tried. The council's first act, freely taken, though I'd be lying if I said the debt room hadn't set the mood, was to cede the border province between our realms to the Margravate, the raided lands, the salt ford, the garrison at Karst, to be held under Asheville law as surety for the reparations schedule. The second was to petition King Aldous to bless a permanent peace. And Aldous, who had waited 2 years to spend 1 paragraph, answered with letters patent that outran every rumor home. The Margravate of Asheville, its compact lands and its ceded province, raised to a sovereign principality in personal union under the Crown's friendship, its lord created prince of the Eastern Marches. The messenger who brought it to me was the same smug little tax assessor, older now, beaming, honored beyond his dreams to be the man with the scroll, and I received it from him with a straight face, and we both enjoyed that enormously. The coronation was held at dawn in the great square at the contract table, under the eave, because I refused every cathedral proposal on the grounds that I had signed everything that mattered in my life on that table, and saw no reason to spoil a working system. 100,000 people filled the streets back to the walls. Aldous set the circlet on my head himself, a plain band at my asking, forged by Grum from the melted iron of a slaver's brand and a Varen pikehead, because my father said walls should remember and so should crowns. My 3 wives stood beside me, Camel, Laurie, Verena, Ledger, Ladle, and Proof in the dawn gold, and when the square finally roared, it roared a word I had never planned for and will never entirely believe. Not Margrave, Prince. Prince of a city that had been 200 souls and a failed harvest, 5 winters ago, when a dying boy woke up in a cold bed with a chime in his ears. The crown was forged a week before the coronation, and the forging was its own ceremony, unplanned, like everything true in this city. Grum barred his foundry doors, then relented when the crowd outside reached 1,000, then flung them open and worked before the whole district, the slaver's brand from my table and a Varen pikehead from the breach going into the crucible together while his masters sang the pouring song. He hammered it plain, a band with no jewel, and quenched it, and held it up with tongs to the crowd and said gruffly into the roar, "It's iron that did harm made into iron that won't. Any of you forget what that costs, come see me." My father wept openly. Sam claims he didn't. The Ledger wisely published no photograph of Sam. That night when the feast had crested and my family was loud and golden in the hall, I slipped out alone to the quiet end of the wall walk, the way you do at your own party when your first life taught you crowds from the outside. And she was there, leaning on the parapet like she'd been waiting 5 years, radiant in a way that made the watchfires look apologetic, warm and mischievous and precisely unchanged. The goddess of karma looked out over my 100,000 lamplit roofs and then at me and smiled her old smile. "Hello, Richard," she said. "I've come to do the accounts." What she showed me there on the wall I will spend the rest of this life failing to describe, but I owe you the attempt because it is the point of everything." She opened the ledger, the real one, the one the blue boxes had always been a child's drawing of, and she showed me my account. And the experience bar, the levels, the numbers I had gamed and chased and grinned at in the dark for 5 years, were not what I had been told. Not exactly. Every chime had been real, but none of them had ever measured nights or contracts or points. The bar measured kept. Every promise, every posted wage, every clause honored when breaking it would have been cheaper. Every morning Marin counted the well boards and found them true. "You thought I gave you a cheat," she said gently, while the whole shining record of it turned in the air between us. "I gave you a habit, Richard, keeping your word where you could watch it fill a bar. The blessing never built any of this. It only ever kept the weather off while you did." I stood on my wall and looked at 5 years of chimes recounted as 5 years of kept promises, and I did the arithmetic I had been avoiding since a golden nowhere. The mild winters, the unbroken wheels, the luck. "How much of it was you?" I asked. "And how much was—" And I stopped because she was already smiling, and the smile was the answer, and it was the same answer the empty shop page had given me. She let me stand in it a moment. Then, because she is who she is, she leaned in, conspiratorial, warm as the first day. "Admit it, though. The daily chime helped. Old habits die hard, Richard." And I laughed until my eyes stung, on my own wall, with my own city glowing under me, and the goddess of karma laughed too, and below us the feast noise rolled on, not one soul aware their prince was up here being audited. Before she went, she glanced at the air beside her, where a small blue box had been hovering at a respectful distance all evening, closer to me than to her, like a child standing near its favorite parent at a formal occasion. "She petitioned to keep your account open, you know," the goddess said, conversationally. "First request of its kind, cited precedent if you can believe it. Yours." The box glowed, caught out and dimmed bashfully, and I looked at the little blue light that had teased me through 5 years of exploits, dimmed itself for my sleep, blessed 3 weddings, and gone red exactly once on the worst morning so that I would ride. "And," I asked. The goddess smiled at the box the way you smile at your best clerk. "I ruled," she said, "that some contracts convert on completion to friendship. The paperwork is unprecedented. She's very pleased with herself." She left the way a sunrise stops being a sunrise, gradually and then completely, and her last words were not for me. She looked down the wall walk, toward the hall, toward the noise, my family's noise, and she said softly in the voice of a bookkeeper closing the year, "Paid in full." Then I was alone on the wall, except that I have never once been alone on that wall, or anywhere, since a boy with a chamber pot met a captain at a window. I went back down to the feast. Laurie saw my face and put a plate in my hands. Verena saw it and put her shoulder against mine. Camel saw it, narrowed her eyes, and quietly checked the household ledger for unexplained entries. I married so far above my station it is not visible from here. The years since are the epilogue, so let me give it to you the way Camel would, line by line, accounts settled. Camel is Lord Treasurer of the Principality, governor of a bank whose notes 3 kingdoms now hold as good as grain, and she rules our treaty ledgers with our first child on her hip, a daughter, born the spring after the coronation, who already grips a quill correctly, which her mother insists is coincidence and is lying. The unsigned marriage contract still hangs framed on the study wall. Visiting ministers ask about it. She tells them every time that is the collateral and declines to explain, and I love her. Laurie's restaurant seats kings. Literally, Aldous eats there on his Eastern progresses. At a corner table he pretends is discreet, and the kitchen pretends not to know him, and everyone enjoys the pretending. She runs cooking schools now in 4 cities, feeds every coronation, wedding, and treaty signing in the Principality, and has never once let a state occasion, a war or a prince interfere with the correct seasoning of anything. Toburn cries at every feast, every single one. He has stopped apologizing for it on his daughter's orders, and the Ledger's Society column simply prints, as a standing line, "The merchant Toburn was moved." Verena is princess consort of Asheville and the living peace of 2 realms. She keeps her father's restored estates in Vera as a trust for the purged families, visits twice a year in state, upright in daylight, announced at every waypost, and comes home. On the first anniversary of the abdication, she planted a tree in our garden, a Veran mountain oak, grown from a seed her father's steward had carried out in his pocket 6 years before her, and she planted it herself, with her hands in our soil, and stood back and said nothing, and none of us said anything either, because some contracts are executed in silence. It is taller than the wall now. Malric in his monastery keeps bees, I am told, badly. Prumir in her convent keeps them brilliantly, the district's best honey, and is, the abbess writes, oddly at peace. I send for a jar every year, and every year I pay full price, and I like to think she knows exactly what that means. My father never remarried, but he never dined alone again either, and if he and Marin believe the entire principality politely unaware of their evening walks, the entire principality is happy to keep believing it. He retired his command the year of the peace, handed the army to Dane, and now teaches swordwork to his grandchildren, badly, gloriously, in the same frosty courtyard, flinching students and patient stances, the lesson never once about the sword. Dane commanded the principality's forces for 6 more years, then retired to a cottage by the Salt Ford, which he received, at my insistence and to his enormous disgust, by formal contract, 12 clauses, notarized, witnessed, and chimed, because I owed him my life and I only sign things I can enforce. He complains about the paperwork of it to this day. He has the document framed. Sam is Knight Commander of Asheville Mixed Companies, 4,000 strong, feared on 2 borders, and he still, in full council before ambassadors, calls me the sickly one. I have never once corrected him. Some contracts are oral. Iska runs the soapworks and the wash houses and the gate tables, forewoman of the industry that clothes a nation in clean white bars, and she still reads the contract herself, aloud every clause to every arrival at the gate, though she has 40 readers trained and no need to. I asked her once why she keeps the shift. She looked at me the way she looked at the pen the first night in the sleet. Because someone read it to me, she said. That is the whole engine of everything I have built, in one sentence, and she said it holding a stew ladle. Pell's granaries feed 6 cities. Grum's foundry casts bells for 3 kingdoms, and every bell is tuned by ear by him, personally, because Standards and his 9 apprentices are masters now with apprentices of their own, and the first bell of every batch still gets hammered once, softly, for a boy who picked up a spear. Kali runs the ledger still, and through it in the way of Kali rather more than the ledger. Editions in 2 realms, a printing house with 40 hands, and a study wall of framed correspondence from powerful people who wrote to her in fury and were answered with subscriptions. Historians already come to her archive. She receives them with tea and needlework, and tells them with a straight face that she was merely the typesetter, and they write it down, and she permits herself one small smile per historian. The compact lords grew old the way they deserved. Hertz saw his grandchildren into the trade and cries at feasts beside Toburn now, a matched set. Wick, to universal astonishment, married the widow schoolteacher, and their wedding was the only occasion in recorded history at which he was seen to dance voluntarily. Aldering died at 91 in his bed, under his grandfather's armor mounted on the wall, a week after attending my daughter's naming in full regalia, and the ledger's notice ran one line, his own requested words. He read what he signed. And the city. The city is the thing I cannot fit in this account, however long I make it. 100,000 and rising. 3 walls, the scar band dark in the second one, names over the gate. 2 languages in the markets, notes in every pocket that are promises, and promises in every ledger that are kept. The schoolhouse is a college now. Ellis runs a physician's hall that takes students from the capital, which he finds eternally funny. The ledger prints daily in 2 realms. And at the gate, under the eave, in every weather the contract table stands with its inkwell full, and the standing orders hold as they have held since a brand lay on my table. Food before questions. Always. A bed. and a page read aloud every clause that turns a stranger into one of ours. My study these days is a museum nobody visits but me, and last night I walked it the way you walk a ledger, line by line. Banknote number 1 framed my signature younger than I remember being. Sam's commission scroll, and beside it, where only I know to look, the sentence. The first ledger with its immortal misprint. A jar of fish sauce, empty, label intact, retired with honors. Marin's original well-bored, the first one, the chalk long fixed under glass. Iska's first contract, the page she signed in the sleet, which she gave me framed on the 10th anniversary of her arrival with a note that said, in her 4-line style, "You keep the paper, I kept the promise." And on the study wall, where it has hung since before there was a principality, a marriage contract, unsigned forever, the collateral. Every empire is a museum of paper. Mine is just honest about it. Last night I worked late, out of old habit, the good kind now. The desk lamp, the quiet, the treaty drafts squared away, and through the door, down the corridor, my family making the noise a house makes when it is full. Camel and Verena arguing happily over a tariff schedule, Laurie's laugh, my daughter demanding, and receiving one more story from her grandfather, Marin's voice, Dane's visiting rumble, the whole warm, unpayable sum of it. And the chime rang, soft, one last time, and I knew before I looked that it was the last time, the way you know a book is ending by the weight of the pages in your right hand. The box was blue and small, and it did not glow like an interface. It glowed like a hearth. Life quest complete, never alone again. Reward, everything you can hear right now. I sat with it a moment, the way you sit with a verdict you argued 5 years for. Then the box faded gently all the way out for good and took nothing with it, because everything it had ever pointed at was still there, laughing down the hall. I did not sign anything. There was nothing left to sign. I capped the ink, banked the lamp, and went to join them. The contract, Lord rest his case.